Greetings, you curiouser and anticipatory Herle Burly-ites. We have what is probably the most keenly awaited podcast in our history today, for a couple of reasons. One, I've teased the thing over the last 2 weeks on our sister pod, Curse of Politics. And two, the main reason, our guest is Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Premier, let me start by thanking you for carving out an hour to have this conversation with me today. Premier Smith may be Canada's #1 newsmaker, premier newsmaker right now. So you engaged Herle Burly-ites know or think you know quite a bit about her. She's clearly a proud Albertan. That's the first line of her official bio. Leader of the United Conservative Party, she was sworn in as the 19th Premier of the province on October 11th, 2022. Today, we'll dive a little deeper into her biography and early political motivations. I want to talk about the Premier's ideological perspectives and her thoughts on what the role of government in society is. I want to talk about the ideas and the issues that are driving her stewardship of the province right now, her approach to the new Carney government, and of course, we have to discuss Alberta and the Federation, and how the Oilers are going to beat the Panthers in 6 games. So, let's get right to it. Premier, how confident are you about the Oilers going into the Stanley Cup Finals?
Oh, it looks so great. The nice part is that everybody is looking pretty healthy. I think we're a little bit worried, especially from last year. Our guys just went in so battered and bruised. It's not great to have Hyman out, but I think that we've got a pretty healthy team. We've got a long break until Wednesday. Of course, the Panthers do too. And the nice part is with them being able to meet with them a second time, they know their weaknesses. So as long as Skinner has a consistent game, I'm feeling pretty good about where we're going to end up this year.
Wow, you are on top of the analysis. Do you think Edmontonians know how lucky they are that twice in their brief history, they've had unequivocally the best hockey player in the world playing for their team?
It's remarkable.
That's something the Toronto Maple Leafs have never had in their whole history, the best player in hockey on their team.
Okay,
right?
Now you're trying to hurt my husband, aren't you? He's a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. And I sent a note to Doug Ford and I said, I'm rooting for your team until we meet up in the finals. Then I'll go back to my team. But wouldn't it have been epic to have the Maple Leafs playing off against the Oilers in the finals? That's what I was really hoping for. Sad it didn't happen this year, but they did well. I mean, my husband had never expected them to get this far because it's been so disappointing for the last couple of decades. So we're pleased to be able to root them on.
Well, come on, be honest with me, though. You're from Calgary. Do you even like the Oilers?
I grew up in an Oilers family. So, like, my brother's going to hate me for saying this, but I've said it before. He cried when Gretzky got traded to the LA Kings. That's what we grew up with. Remember, I think they won 4 Stanley Cups in 5 years. And then the Flames ended up winning right after that, I believe in 89. And so I am genuinely one of those unicorn Albertans that truly in my heart root for both teams. I honestly do. I love them both.
You know, Hillary Clinton said she cheered for both the Boston Red Sox and the New York Yankees, and nobody believed her, right? Because you cannot cheer for the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox.
I'm just letting you know, we were an Oilers family, love Gretzky, and I also had Gary Roberts' number 10 card as well. So I was a Flames fan too.
Well, there you go, and there's your tangential Leafs connection too. All right, let's move on from hockey. You're from Calgary, as you said. You grew up in Calgary. What was childhood like? What'd your parents do?
Oh, my parents met really young. So I remember Mom telling me that she first spotted my dad at the ice rink wearing a duck sweater. So she called him Ducky. And then they ended up getting on a blind date together in high school on different dates. She was out with his best friend and he was out with her best friend, and they swapped at the end of the evening, and they've been together literally ever since. They got married at 18 and 19, had 5 kids before they were 30. I grew up in a sort of a very middle-class kind of neighborhood. My parents still live in the home that we moved into when I was 9 years old. Nice. And are still together today. And they're my biggest supporters. And we've got a very, very tight family. And so it's been wonderful to have that kind of support from them over the years.
You said it was middle class. What did that mean? How would you describe your childhood in terms of its economics and culture?
Well, because they got married so young, our first home that I remember living in was row housing in Merrill Park, which was subsidized at the time. But as soon as they could, when I was, I think, 4 years old, they bought their first 700 square foot bungalow because great grandma had to go into the home, and they ended up buying great grandma's home. very quickly after that, they got their forever home by the time I was 9 years old. And as I say, right now, I mean, before it was on the very outskirts of the city. When we first moved there were still cows in the field across. Now it's considered inner city because Calgary has just boomed so much. But it was a wonderful childhood to be able to be out riding your bike or playing pom-pom pull away or flag football or, touch football in the park until 10 o'clock at night. We had lived in a cul-de-sac. And so we had a really great group of friends in the neighborhood. And so it was,
come home when the streetlights come on, right?
Oh yeah, completely.
Come home when the streetlights come on. That's what
I still remember coming in one time. It was like 10 to 10 at night, and we didn't know it was so late because it was still bright outside. Yeah. And so it was. Growing up in Calgary at that time was amazing.
Yeah. I read somewhere where you described your parents as reliably conservative. What does that mean? And what impact did that have on you?
I think what I would say about them, one of the things I love about them is that they love each other and stay together. And relationships are not always easy, but they always knew that creating that stability for their family was their number one. They love each other as a couple that's been together 55 years, like no one I've ever seen. It's inspiring to me to see that. They also knew, I think, that their job was to raise their kids so one of us could be independent and make good decisions. And all of us have, like we've all ended up finding significant others of our own that we've built lives with. They continue to have Easter dinner and Christmas dinner and host as many of their big family as they can. They've got grandkids now. So they've been really inspirational that way, I think from a family values point of view. But Dad also didn't like when teachers would try to counter program in the school. So the story I often tell is that the day I stopped being looking at communism as a potential option for Canada was when I came home and my social studies teacher was trying to tell us how great communism was. My dad went to the school and re-educated him because he's got Ukrainian heritage and didn't think much of the Holodomor and the starvation of Ukrainians. And so we started talking about politics at that time. And so I think that when I got old enough to be able to vote myself and wanted to join a political party, I joined the Progressive Conservative Club on campus very quickly after that, became the riding or the campus club president. And I've stayed on that side of the political spectrum ever since.
It's interesting, conservatism feels to me, particularly in the prairies, but not exclusively, to have radicalized since that period of time. And it kind of radicalized, I think, around the time you were at U of C, because I've read that you were there when Flanagan was teaching and when Brody was a teaching assistant there and which is kind of the foundations of modern conservatism intellectually in the country. But when I think back to the old PC party, conservative politics seems more radical now than it was then. Do you agree with that?
I think something did change. I mean, I met Corey tonight. I know he's one of your regular strategists on your podcast, but I met Corey when I was a delegate to the leadership race. He was a Jim Edwards delegate. I was a Jean Charest delegate, and so I thought it was really interesting. This guy from Ontario, well, I guess he's from Saskatchewan, but at that time he was from Ontario, supporting a Western candidate, and I from Western Canada was supporting an Eastern candidate. But I think what happened there was with the collapse of the Progressive Conservative Party. After that vote, I stayed Progressive Conservative right through the collapse. I was not an early adopter of the Reform Party. I think I even stayed Progressive Conservative for a year afterwards. I think the first budget that Paul Martin put forward, I just shook my head and saying, this is going to lead us to a debt crisis. And that's when I bit the bullet and said, well, the only conservative option on there is the Reform Party. That's when I joined Ted White's board, because I was living in North Vancouver at the time. And ironically, it turns out that the combination of Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin were probably the most fiscally conservative duo that we've had at the federal level ever since. But I think it was that those of us who were more progressive conservative, I think that when the progressive conservative option really collapsed at the federal level, it created a new merger, a new realignment. And I think there's a bit more of a populist strain in the new conservative movement than there had been historically in the Progressive Conservative Party. Progressive Conservative is, I think, a lot more of a delegated style decision making. I think that Reform Conservatives believed in things like direct democracy and the power of the people. And merging those two cultures is not easy. It's come apart and come back together, and come apart and come back together again. And we're at a situation, I think, both federally and as well in Alberta, where we do have an alliance of the two different streams of conservatism. And it makes for some interesting conversations at the AGM. But I think it's probably a recognition of where our country is, that when conservative movements split apart, then Liberal and NDP governments get elected. And so we try to find the areas that we can focus on that we agree with each other. And that's, part of the reason why we don't have policies on every little thing, and why some big things you kind of leave to direct democracy or citizen initiative and referenda, so that you can maintain that alliance. That's how I see it anyway.
So last week I broached the subject of how we're living in the time of a copper boom. Hard to imagine the pennies jangling around in our pockets 40 or 50 years ago would be worth anything more than, well, a penny. But here we are. Today's green energy and tech sectors require a hell of a lot of copper for things like electric vehicles, 5G technology, and renewable energy. The stuff is in high demand, and so prices have skyrocketed. Into that context, an indisputable fact. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, has a ton of the ever more precious metal because they've spent the last several years replacing legacy copper telephone lines with their more sustainable, durable, and lightning-fast pure fiber. So, good for TELUS, eh? Valuable commodity plus perfect market timing leads to immense corporate gain. That would be the rich get richer story you might expect. Except this. TELUS is taking the proceeds from their copper recycling and reinvesting it back into their communities, turning old copper into lasting, tangible social good in a couple of different ways. One, it's helping partially fund their Mobility for Good program, which connects Canadians in need, low-income seniors and families, youth leaving government care, Indigenous women at risk of violence, and government-assisted refugees all have access to free or discounted smartphones and mobile plans. And two, they're redeveloping their large decommissioned copper sites, unlocking valuable urban real estate in a time of, let's face it, huge need for creative housing solutions. The initiative is called TELUS Living. 3 projects are already underway in BC, with more to come across the country, producing innovative, purpose-built rental housing. If I may, that's as pretty a penny as it gets. In terms of your own thinking, then, how would you define your conservatism or your ideology, your approach, what the role of government? What do you think?
I've defined myself as a libertarian conservative. I don't know if there's such a thing, but it's part of the reason why I found myself on the conservative side of the spectrum as opposed to the left wing side of the spectrum. I believe that we should have autonomy to make as many decisions as possible individually and for our families and for our communities, and government should be a last resort, not a first resort. But if to live the good life, making good decisions leads to better outcomes. If you don't, get up for work in the morning and don't get addicted to anything, and find a life partner and have a family and be involved in your community, whether it's through a nonprofit group or through a church, all of these things are foundational to, I think, flourishment as an individual. And so that's why I look at the two together, is that I think civil and property rights are vitally important, but I also recognize that some choices lead down one pathway and other choices lead down another. So I think it's important for us to encourage people to be able to make good decisions and help people when they fall to be able to get back up on a life to independence again.
Right. And so the libertarian side of it is allow people to make as many decisions as they can. What's the conservative side of it?
Well, I'll tell you a little more about the libertarian side because they do intersect, right? Because I've been challenged a bit on a few of the decisions that we're making in Alberta, one particularly on compassionate intervention. Now, I think the extreme conservatives might say, my body, my choice, whatever I put in my body is my business. Government shouldn't get in the way. But the conservative part of that is that your right to swing your fist stops where someone else's nose begins. And if your drug use leads you to being on the street, creating social nuisance, creating danger, stealing from people, overdosing 186 times, as one individual did in Alberta last year, then you're inviting your neighbors via government to step in and say you're not allowed to do this anymore. You can't conduct your life in a way that causes supreme harm to yourself or others. And we're going to try to step in, get you clean, and get you hopefully on a path to recovery. So that's how I see the two of them coming together. Is that we're all societal people. We all have to live in a community. And so we have to find a way to allow people maximum freedom, but there are times when government has to step in if it ends up creating harm to others. So that's where I see the intersection. There's plenty of issues like that. Is where does freedom start impacting on the health of the community and the impact on others? And I don't know that that's an easy line to find, but that's one of the things I've spent a lot of my career, whether it's been in media, in advocacy, or in the think tank world, or even in politics, trying to sort out.
Let me put this, let me try to get this tangibly. Do you believe in single payer universal Medicare?
Yes. But where the difference is that we also believe that people don't care what particular facility they get their treatment at, as long as they don't pay out of pocket.
Right.
And so I know the left likes to mischaracterize what we're doing by allowing charter surgical centers, as a for instance, creating an activity-based funding model, having local decision-making, all of those things. I like to criticize that and mischaracterize it. But what I would say is that if you reward a facility by giving them payment based on the number of procedures they will perform, guess what? They find a way to perform more procedures. And that's what we're moving towards here. What we found is that it's the charter surgical centers that are owned by private groups of doctors that seem to be the innovators in trying to find those new models. But yes, I mean, I fully recognize that the vast, vast majority of Canadians would be bankrupted if they had to pay for their urgent care if something occurred. And so from a compassionate point of view, we part of our social contract is that is one of the things that we've put forward that we support and value. So I think that there's a way for us to use the private sector for delivery, but to make sure that people are protected so that they don't end up having to pay out of pocket when they can't afford it. And every province has this. Ontario has the Shouldice Clinic, which I think is renowned for doing hernia replacement. I think Quebec
they cherry pick a little bit, eh? Like you can't get into Shouldice if they think you're the least bit overweight, right? And so you're going to end up in a public hospital. Right?
Sure. And we see the same thing too. I mean, but I think that is a feature of why you want to use the specialized clinics, because why wouldn't we want them to take the easy cases so that our public hospitals can focus on the hard cases? I think that's actually a positive.
It just makes comparison difficult though, right? In terms of who's efficient and who isn't efficient.
I think you need both. I mean, I think that you can actually see, and truly, you've actually got a really good example of a public hospital that's very efficient. CBC did a report on Humber River Hospital, which is of great interest to me. You can ask my ministers. I've sent it around often over the last couple of months as we've been talking about what it is we want to do. And I'll tell you, it's just a 4.5-minute video if people want to look it up. Humber River, CBC, you'll find it. But one of the innovations that they had is they realized if you can have a doctor who's able to have both emergency rooms booked or both operating rooms booked at the same time, you can have a surgical team prepare a patient, doc comes in, does the surgery. By the time they're done, the patient in the other operating room is prepared. They go in, do the surgery. In the episode I saw, they managed to get 14 joint replacements done in an 8-hour time block. And that's wonderful. And if we can get all of our hospitals operating that way, there might not need to be a need to have other charter surgical centers out there. But that's what I want to see, is that kind of innovation. That has nothing to do with private versus public, do you pay or don't you pay? It just has everything to do with creating the environment where people are going to be motivated to get better and better and better. We've got a limited amount of dollars that taxpayers are willing to spend on in a general way. And so let's find a way to use them most efficiently so we can get better performance, better working conditions for frontline, and treat more patients. I think that's the kind of triple wins we're looking for.
What is the value of single payer in the sense that why wouldn't a libertarian conservative support two-tier healthcare?
Well, just look at what's happening in the United States. I mean, it got tragic last year with the murder of a CEO of a health company because of the perception and maybe even the reality, I guess we'll find out, that they were purposely delaying the approval of people getting care. That's horrendous. That's sort of the worst case example of what you could imagine happening in a multi-payer system. The other thing, secondarily, they're talking about the largest number, I think, of personal bankruptcies in the United States are for people who have unpaid medical bills. And I guess thirdly, the litigious nature and the medical costs have accelerated because of tort law, and people getting sued because a child doesn't perform well in elementary school, and so they blame the doctor who delivered them. Those are some of you when we just have to look south of the border to see in the extreme what the worst case scenario is. I think we've got a pretty good approach by saying let's do single payer, but then let's allow for innovation through competition, through choice, through different service providers. I think if we can make that work, I think we can have an excellent system. The problem that we've had is that they've commingled the two. A lot of the proponents of a single payer system think that you also need to have a single provider. And having gone through an economics degree in university, one of the first things you're taught is monopolies don't work. Because if you get a guaranteed number of customers, you are not interested in finding a more efficient, cost-effective way of doing things, because why would you? You're not going to lose any market share. So if monopolies don't work in the private sector, I can assure you that monopoly provision is going to have the same problems in the public sector as well. So that's why I think we've gone a little bit too far down the pathway of it commingling the two. I support single payer, but let's try to find multiple service providers and see if we can improve the system. And that's the kind of approach that they take in the universal models I am looking at. There are universal systems that offer sort of this mixed provision in Sweden, in Switzerland, in Japan, in Korea, and you're still able to provide and pay for the population, but you have different service provision, and it's resulted in, I think, much better results.
Interesting. Okay, thanks. Maybe this one's a little more difficult. What do you think about subsidized childcare?
We're supportive of that too. I mean, we signed a deal with the federal government.
Right.
And I'll tell you some of the problems that we have with it, though, and I think Ontario has it too, and I know other provinces do as well, is that I think it would be far better for us to have a sliding scale of subsidy, so that the poorer the family, the more we subsidize, the richer the family, the less we subsidize. By taking the approach that the federal government has insisted upon, we have now, we believe, I think, 100,000 people on a waiting list, and the bulk of the people receiving subsidized childcare earn $180,000 or more a year, 47%. So when I look at equity, is it really equitable for a single mom who makes $60,000 a year to be waiting on a waiting list while the double income lawyer family has been able to secure the spots? So I would far rather, and this is what we'll be asking the federal government to do with us, is can we find a way where we give a greater subsidy to low income individuals, and then we have the subsidy get smaller for those who are higher income, just as a way of making sure that the system is affordable.
But that seems entirely practical. It seems to me like your issue is entirely practical. But I talk to conservatives, I'll name one, Ken Bosencool, who will say to me, why are we encouraging one lifestyle choice over another? Why are we providing money to women who want to work outside the home as opposed to providing some blanket thing to couples or women, whatever they want to do with their lives?
We could have implemented it. So that's one part of how I would have implemented it if I'd been around when it was first being implemented. The second is that you could have given a more generous tax benefit to individuals who are staying at home and taking care of their own children. And so that would have created that balance. But what I will say is that we had 21% of kids under the age of 5 in childcare under our old system. Under this new system, it's 43%. So it has doubled the number of people who want to have childcare, so very likely so that both parents can work. But still, the majority of people are making the decision that they want to stay at home with their own kids. And so that I think that the choice has been preserved. And I think that we have to be mindful that there are a lot of low-income families who wouldn't be able to have both parents work except for this option. So I think there's a way to be supportive, and I think that there's a way to be able to address all of those different issues. But I think the one size fits all, that's where we're creating real problems, because what it's resulting in is it's resulting in rationing of the number of daycare spaces. And when you ration, you're going to end up having people who are left out. And I don't think that that's a system that we should be wanting to create. And so I think there's going to need to be a pretty hard conversation about how we modify it. We've got a proposal on the table. Well, I'll let you know if it's successful. But we've got a new prime minister. It wasn't successful when we tried to put it forward under the old prime minister. Maybe the new one will be a little bit more pragmatic.
Maybe. Well, we're going to see relatively quickly, aren't we? Well, as you may have heard, King Charles is in Ottawa this week to deliver the speech from the throne. There have been a few changes since January 6th. There's my talent for understatement. In fact, the months since Parliament was dissolved have passed like a freight train. There's my talent for inventing a segue. Our sponsor, CN, wishes the new Parliament Godspeed in tackling the new economy. There's a long overdue need for streamlining regulation and reforming our system of taxation. CN has been a consistent voice for both of these things. But there's another event taking place this week in Ottawa that will garner less attention, and it deserves more than just a nod. The annual conference of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities kicks off on Thursday. It is our nation's largest gathering of elected officials, 1,500 mayors, councillors, reeves, and other officials. These people are where the rubber of housing policy, infrastructure renewal, or public safety hits the figurative road of daily Canadian life. They are essential to the success of a range of national policy solutions. They are every bit as important as the federal legislators who will be gathering just a bit further up Wellington Street. CN has built deep connections with municipalities over the last century, particularly those along its coast-to-coast network. One of the railway's most important priorities is what's called the Proximity Initiative. Basically, it involves working with municipal planners and engineers to minimize the impact on residents living near tracks used by some of the biggest machines ever invented, noise and vibration being two of the main concerns. The program basically codifies common sense cooperation, particularly as populations expand and new developments spring up near rail lines, some of which have existed as long as Canada itself. It's a journey, as they say, but CN is committed to it, and CN will be there in Ottawa this week. Listen, we have to get into issues of the Federation and all that, and I do want to do that, but I'm also conscious of the fact that outside of Alberta, that's pretty much all people hear from you about, those kinds of issues, disputes with the federal government, etc. And I want to give you a little bit of time to talk to us about what you're doing domestically in Alberta as a government that you're proud of, that you'd like us to know about.
Well, so many. I mean, I take the Constitution seriously. Not everyone does, but I'd encourage maybe some of your audience to read the Constitution so that they can see what powers have been delegated to the federal government, what powers have been delegated to the provincial government, because that's, I think, foundationally at the dispute that we have with central Canada and maybe with central governments in general, is that they seem to diminish the role of the provincial government. And I think the role of the provincial government is vitally important. When I was trying to think of the best way to describe what I think the role of each level of government is, the Fed should focus on ports, the provincial should focus on people, and this municipal should focus on potholes. That sort of just gives you the big general areas that I think we need to focus on. And so this is why we keep asking the federal government stick in your lane, meet our 2% NATO target, build our ports and our highways and our pipelines, as well as our rail system, our infrastructure. That's what we really need to be able to get our product to market, have good relations with the world, find new markets. Those are the things that I think the Fed should be focused on. But instead, we have successive prime ministers who think they're premiers and want to focus on the things that are our job. So our job is to make sure that we deliver an efficient, cost-effective, and a performing healthcare system, is to provide K-12 education, to give kids the best opportunity, whether they're going on to university or whether they're going into a skilled trade or profession, to make sure that we've got a robust university system that attracts the best minds from around the world, and a research support for that, so that we can attract those great academics, and all of the infrastructure associated with being able to do that, the schools, the hospitals, the roads, rail. Those are all things that are in our jurisdiction. So we've been going down a pathway of how can we optimize the performance of our system. And so this is why we are starting with the biggest problem that we have, which is an underperforming healthcare system. And the innovations that we learn there, we're going to apply to other program delivery. And there is a difference, right? When it goes back to what we were talking about before, there is a difference in how conservatives deliver on essential social programs versus how socialists deliver on essential social programs.
How can you spend too much money on education? Give me that, for example. How can you spend too much on education?
You spend it differently. So I'll tell you, in our province, we believe in choice. We believe you have a right to be able to send your kid to a good local public school, or if you're Catholic, a Catholic school, or if you're Francophone, a Francophone school, or if none of the above and you want to go to an independent school, or a charter school, or if you want to homeschool your kids, you can do that too. That's the difference, is that we embrace all of those choices. We have different funding models and we fund them each at different levels, but you have to be able to give a good education to every child based on what the parents think is going to work for them, and you have to offer different choices. Now, that isn't the case in other jurisdictions. There's lots of jurisdictions who don't support independent schools, homeschooling, or charter schools, and there's lots of jurisdictions that have ended their support for Catholic education. We haven't. So that's what I would say is maybe the ideological difference. It's not how much you spend, it's how you deliver, and we just happen to deliver it in a different way.
Can you be ambivalent about these schools, though, in the sense that, is it okay for me to graduate from grade 12 believing in creationism?
I don't know if there's very many examples of that. I mean, I suppose that's an extreme example, but what I have found is that if you look at the performance and the academic achievement and what kids do after high school, there's very good performance from our homeschool kids, our charter school kids, and private school kids. So if the job of a school is to prepare a child for what comes next when they're an adult, I would say that our choice model is winning in spades. And so that's what I would look at.
But do you impose curriculum mandates on all those other schools that they have to teach certain things?
Sure. And most of them do an enhanced. Most of them look at that as sort of the minimum, and then they'll do enhanced education beyond that.
I was following Saskatchewan more closely, and I know that some of the religious schools there were pretty dubious on the content side.
Okay, I don't think that's the case in Alberta. We even have in our homeschool families, we've got a sort of a blended model so that kids are able to sign up to a school board and have some instruction from a teacher. Often it's virtual, but then also the parents are able to lead the curriculum at home. But the very strong sense that I get is that those programs have enrichment and different courses that they offer in addition to what we provide in the curriculum.
Yeah. Under your government, is Alberta still rat-free?
It sure is. Proudly. Rat Patrol is one of our most important programs.
How do you know that for sure?
Well, because I think I just saw a video recently where they followed Rat Patrol out. It's because people take it seriously. Yeah. And if any rats come in from, because we do have places where we have to monitor our border crossings from Saskatchewan as
Absolutely.
well as
Saskatchewan's full of rats. We have never been able to claim that we are rat free. We are full of rats.
And
So
yeah, so when we hear about it, we go out and they get eradicated.
yeah,
So they as we take
right
it
at the border,
seriously. We
you have
want
your
we
own
want to
ice.
maintain it.
You have your own ice system for rats.
It's the truth. We want to, and we want to, and we take. I mean, we take all of these invasive species seriously. We got
Liberals.
wild boars. I mean, that's our big problem right now. The federal government has said that our farmers can't use strychnine, so we've got gophers that are eating up all of our fields. Like we have a number of pest problems, but somehow we've managed to solve it on rats. But we've got a few others that we got to deal with.
Right. I have to ask you about this. I don't really want to do it, but I have to ask you about this. You Your government seems embroiled in a scandal about healthcare. And I don't know any of the details of it, but I'm interested in your point of view on it. It does appear to me that the government has a closer relationship with this one family than would normally pass scrutiny. Certainly in the WE charity test, it wouldn't pass that level of scrutiny. What's going on that issue?
Well, I would say that there's a lot of rumor and gossip and innuendo and untruths and misinformation, and all of that gets bundled into news stories. The truth of the matter is that there's the former CEO raised concerns about contracting out to various charter surgical centers, none of which are owned by the family in question. So the family that you're raising received none of the contracts for charter surgical facilities. And the issue around the charter surgical facilities is that they sign different contract prices at different facilities for the same services. And the question was, well, why is that? I'm interested in knowing the answer to that too. But what we have done since is we've looked and said, well, what was the price being charged or the cost at all of our public hospitals? The AHS CEO never did any of that analysis. We did. And we're about to release the cost of every procedure that we perform in our public system at every hospital so that people have an apples to apples comparison. So I think that will help clear up some of the issues. The other
Do you
issue,
feel you know the truth? Because the
yep,
the judge that you've asked to look into it has, I guess, asked for a 4-month extension on
yeah.
this. So are you still waiting to find things out, or do you think you know everything you need to know?
I know as much as I need to know that we need to continue down the pathway of allowing charter surgical centers. The former CEO, and it was in our statement of defense, she had commissioned 2 reports looking at this one in particular, and both of them said there was no reason not to extend the contract. So as I say, I think that there's the reason you hire a judge is that when you're in the middle of an HR dispute, one person gives their perspective with a $1.7 million ask attached to it. And then we have to provide a defense with our perspective. And then it's up to a judge to look at who has which claim has the greater veracity. So we're going to let that process play out. I feel that, I mean, what it caused us to do, which was really important, was to look into whether or not AHS did have bad procurement practices. It caused us to look into why it is our public hospitals are so underperforming. Why is it that we've given $3.5 billion more to AHS, our public hospital provider, and they are doing no more surgeries today than they were 6 years ago? Meanwhile, our charter surgical facilities, because we pay them for each procedure, they're now performing 50% more surgeries than they were 6 years ago, going from 40,000 to 65,000. That allows us to say, maybe paying per procedure is actually the way to get better performance. So I don't mind people raising questions. So it allows us to take a closer look at it. I don't think that that's what they anticipated our takeaways would be, but it is. It's confirmed for me that what we're doing with charter surgical facilities is absolutely the right pathway to go down, and we're going to aim to do more of it.
Okay. Well, thanks. Thanks for answering that. Some of the best Canadian business stories start with a dream, a deep fryer, and a TikTok account. Meet Marc-Antoine Gagnon from Canteen Chez Mag, a seasonal roadside gym on Ile d'Orléans, just outside Quebec City. Back in 2023, Marc-Antoine and his team joined TikTok to show off their lobster rolls, burgers, and, yes, their now famous lobster poutine. Then Quebec creator Olivier Primo made a TikTok video calling it one of the best poutines in the province. And TikTok did what TikTok does. Overnight, Chez Mag went from regional favorite to full-blown destination. Marc-Antoine doubled his staff, launched a food truck, and picked up 10,000 new followers along the way. Now, Chez Mag isn't just a canteen, it's a culinary crush, drawing crowds from across the country. But here's the catch. The last federal government ordered TikTok to shut down its Canadian offices, cutting the teams who support businesses like Chez Mag and putting hundreds of good Canadian jobs at risk. With the new government in Ottawa, we've got a chance to keep TikTok Canada working for creators like Marc Antoine. Over 14 million Canadians use TikTok every month to find joy and build businesses. Let's find a solution that keeps these stories and businesses cooking. So let's get to energy, environment, climate, investment, growth, economic growth, the Federation, all of these tangled issues. You wrote a letter to the new Prime Minister yesterday or today? Was it today or yesterday that you?
A couple of days ago.
A couple of days ago.
It's in the newspaper as of
Right.
Saturday. So
Correct. Right. It starts off, it doesn't start off, but it says in there, liberal policies have cost us a decade of opportunities and tens of billions of dollars in lost royalties that could have been invested in the health, education, infrastructure, and social services Albertans and Canadians need. Can I just ask why do you partisanize it by calling it liberal governments as opposed to the federal government?
well,
Like, federal governments don't tend to talk about provincial conservative or NDP or liberal governments. They just tend to describe them as provincial governments. There seems to be and again, let me extend the question. What would Alberta be like if Trudeau never existed? If Harper had governed for the last 10 years, Justin Trudeau never wins the 2015 election, what would the difference in your view be?
I would say we would have built the Northern Gateway pipeline because it was already approved and permitted. I think we would have built the Energy East pipeline because there would have been a pathway under a permit approval process where they could see a yes. We might have even had more advocacy on Keystone XL so it didn't get canceled 5 seconds after Joe Biden got sworn into office. And so when you look at all three of those projects that would very likely be up and running now, that would have allowed for us to sell 2.5 million barrels of oil per day. So if you do the math on that, 2.5 per day, 365 days a year at prevailing prices of $60, that's $55 billion that would be flowing into Alberta and GDP. And governments get anywhere from 20 to 30% of that. So we calculate conservatively $17 billion more today that we would be having that would allow us to build schools, hospitals, roads. Large amount of that money gets transferred because of the higher personal and corporate income taxes that go to Ottawa, which go to benefit every Canadian. So it's not just idle. It's not just us ideologically just trying to gainsay one or the other. Policy matters. So when you put a tanker ban off the northwest BC coast, so you can't put bitumen on a tanker, and it's the only product that you're not allowed, incidentally, to put on a tanker and get off of our soil. When you say that we have a permit approval process that is so convoluted it would take a decade to go through with no end in sight and no guarantee you're actually going to get to a yes. If you have no recognition of the difference in our country about how electricity is generated, knowing that we sit on a natural gas basin and it is the most cost-effective way for us to build power and put in arbitrary rules, you're going to impact the ability to do investment. Those are liberal policies. Those didn't come in during the previous government, and those have had a very clear impact on our province. So that's the reason I think that you see that. Now, that being said, after creating an environment where nothing could get built, they ended up having to get one built, which was the Trans Mountain Pipeline, at a cost of about 5 times more than the private sector would do it. But you can't have an environment where the federal government creates such a convoluted approval process that the only way is for them to invest taxpayer money in every piece of infrastructure. They just couldn't possibly afford that. So our view is get the environment right. Get back to an environment where private sector investment wants to build these things. And then I think we'd be able to find some common ground.
Premier, I'm not very familiar with Northern Gateway. I do know that there are differences of opinion about whether Northern Gateway would ever have gotten built, given the court challenges, etc., to it. But I do know a fair bit about Energy East. And if Stephen Harper or Andrew Scheer or Aaron O'Toole or Pierre Poilievre were ever of the opinion that they were going to force Quebec to build that pipeline against the official position of the Quebec government, I never heard any of those people say that publicly.
The Energy East, I'll tell you what's happened, what's changed. I think back in the mid 2000s, I think those who do big linear infrastructure projects, they thought that they could just take a map, draw a ruler, and say, what's the shortest distance between here and here? And let's go and try to get an approval process and build it. And prior to, call it 2008, maybe you could get projects approved that way. Today, you can't. It's just not possible. You can't have a proponent that has to go through and deal with all of the municipal zoning laws, First Nations ownership, private land ownership, environmental issues, from wetlands to endangered species to water use to everything in between, to multiple jurisdictions, to international jurisdictions, without any help from government. That's why it's failing. And so we have to flip it. We have to start with governments agreeing that here's a corridor that we want construction to go in. We have to do the First Nations consultation and equity ownership. We have to sort through the areas that are going to be of historic or environmental value. We have to determine those issues in advance, and then we have to call for proponents. And I think that that's been the major change in the last 20 years. It's just that there's been a different expectation, and it's become virtually impossible for a proponent-led project to do it on their own. So yes, maybe it was possible in the Harper era, but I think it became increasingly impossible in the last 10 years.
Right. But what I'm saying is I never heard Harper say, fuck, Quebec can't stop this if they want to. But we're going to build Energy East, regardless of what the Quebec government's opinion is. Now, it may be that in the current circumstances, the Quebec government sees this favorably. But back in those days, they did not. Right?
There is a job to be done on advocacy. I mean, when I say that the proponent-led projects sometimes don't take into account local conditions, well, Francois Legault has been very honest with me, saying it's very difficult to get a pipeline project approved in Montreal. But if you go further north, the further north you go, the more support there is. And so maybe you could have the Saguenay gas project get back on track. So I think that that's why the politicians and the relationship between premiers and the relationship with the federal government matters, and why we also have to start identifying what are some of the barriers and how can we help. It's part of the reason we pioneered in our province the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation grants. We started with $1 billion to underwrite existing pipelines, albeit, but the nice part about existing pipelines is they already have a guaranteed revenue stream. So if you can help a group of Indigenous leaders and communities buy an equity stake, they're instantly getting dividend revenue from that. They instantly have a stake in being able to benefit from that development, and they instantly have a seat at the table to identify if there's future projects that need to be done a different way. That wasn't there 15 years ago, but I can tell you my view is I don't know that you'll see another linear project get done today, whether it's a transmission line or a pipeline, without Indigenous equity ownership in it. And that was what Northern Gateway was going to do. Northern Gateway was going to have, I think, 35 bands were going to be owners of that. I don't know if there was an equity component of Energy East, but if we were to reimagine it today, number one, we would talk to Quebec and say, what do you think is a plausible route? And then number two, how can we get Indigenous ownership so that we can get them at the table so that we can hear about what the local conditions would be? I think we'd do it differently, but it takes governments working together to do that.
Right. Somehow when Ontario talks about something that it wants or needs, it talks about it because Ontario thinks about itself as Canada. So this is good for Canada. And Alberta tends to talk about things as if they're good for Alberta. So I know that in Energy East days, Western politicians were going to Quebec and saying, you owe us this. You need to do this for us. We deserve this. which is not that motivating a thing to say to people, as opposed to this is a nation building thing that will benefit all of us. Do you think
I
there's some
guess.
outsider mentality that prevents Albertans from seeing themselves as the drivers of Canada that they are?
I would say, there it may well be that we could have done a better job communicating over the years about how all of us benefit from Alberta's wealth, because we do. When we develop a major pipeline project, I think Ottawa benefits almost equally to us. We get royalties, but they get higher corporate and personal income taxes that are generated from the jobs created in that industry. And so when Ottawa gets more money, it allows them to do more social transfers, which is what they do. They're absolutely connected. I think the thing that was not well known is just how much oil and gas we export. We produce 4.3 million barrels a day. Bulk of it goes to the United States, and in doing so, we have a $188 billion trade relationship with the United States. Alberta alone, we're second in Canada with that trade relationship, only behind Ontario. So I think that maybe that wasn't very well understood. Is that when we do well, the rest of Canada does well. But this is part of the reason, and I hope you hear more about it, because this is the one that I'm putting on the table. Is I'll work and see if Energy East can be revitalized or reignited in some way with a different route. But the one that's most important to me is something off the northwest BC coast, probably Port of Prince Rupert. And you probably saw the premiers got together last week, the Western premiers, to talk about a corridor that would stretch from Port of Prince Rupert to the Port of Churchill. And why is that? Well, because if you can go to the Port of Churchill and get some icebreakers, now you're helping the shipbuilders on the East Coast. If you can go up and over, you can
And dovetailing with defense, you've got a few things coming into
completely, but you can go up and over and you can feed those refineries on the East Coast, but you can also go further beyond and feed Europe. So that's an important leg. But if you're going west and you're starting to build some spur lines, you can build a spur line for CN into the Ring of Fire. You can build a spur line up to Hay River so that you can bring down the critical minerals there. And if you can double that rail line, you can do oil by rail, but then you can also do food, fiber, finished products, and open up the gateway to the east. We have about an 8 to 10 day run to get our product to Japan and to South Korea, and then of course onto China and India, and all of the incredible opportunity we have there. So I think this is maybe the way we've got to be thinking about the country, is that Eastern Canada has always been oriented towards Europe, and I think a lot of our policies have been oriented towards how do we have a stronger partnership with our European allies, and that's important. But for the West, absolutely the most vital markets are going to be the ones that we have off the West Coast. But there's a way for all of us to benefit. And the reason I also like to talk about Port of Prince Rupert is that Caisse de dépôt et placement owns 20% of DP World, which is the Dubai-based company. Right. And so they are responsible for 5 of our most important ports in Canada. So Quebec even benefits from being able to develop that. So that's why I put that on the table, is I think that there's a way for us to, let me add one more. If you develop this corridor, now when Manitoba develops more hydro resources, or when Saskatchewan develops nuclear resources, or if BC needs to be able to get wind and solar from Alberta, now you can interchange across the entire West. And we haven't done that before. We've been oriented northwest, north-south. Now we're talking about how we can be oriented east-west. And I can tell you the constructive conversation we have at the Premier's table is how can we help each other? For instance, Doug just sent a letter saying, here's the list of the 10 cars that are produced in Ontario. Can you ask your departments if they can make a priority of buying these 10 models in your fleet vehicles? So I sent that over to my Service Alberta minister, and they said, sure, we can, as long as Ontario is willing to carry more Alberta liquor on their shelves. So there's a little horse trading that goes along here. But I think that there's been a spirit of cooperation unlike anything I've seen in Canada in a long time. And it's
you make anything good besides rye whiskey? I mean, I know you
But
make good rye whiskey. Do you make anything else?
we've got malt whiskey too. I mean, I went to Ireland and I discovered every time you stopped into one of the distilleries, you asked where they got their barley from, and they said that they got it from Canada. So if they can ship it over there and make incredible whiskey, why can't we make some malt whiskey here? So we've got that. We got an incredible microbrew industry for beer. We even have mead. I got a wonderful bottle of mead and
That's a niche market, yeah, Premier. I think that
it is.
yeah,
But
I think
we've got the spirits. We've got some incredible distilleries and microbrew beers. So maybe we'll be able to come to a deal.
I would still lean on the oil and gas for prosperity, not the mead. Yeah.
You haven't tried it yet.
um, I guess I started thinking about this when you started talking about the Canada Pension Plan.
Hmm.
Is Confederation a cost benefit transactional analysis at all times, or does being a citizen of Canada transcend that somehow?
Well, I don't know. I would love for you to ask that question of Andrew Coyne, because Andrew Coyne is very critical of us talking about an Alberta pension plan. But part of my thinking about why we might need to is because of the writing that he has done about how terribly the CPP has been managed over the last number of years. His most recent column, he talked about how it used to be passive management. They had 150 employees. It was only a couple $100 million to operate. And now it's a massive number of employees costing $6 billion to operate, and they have lower returns than if it was passively managed. So should we just sit back and watch as we overpay into a plan and watch that there's no accountability back to the provincial stakeholders? They don't ask me about their investment strategy or whether they're going in the right direction. They don't ask me about their management expenses. They don't ask me about the 50 companies they've invested in China and whether or not that's a good investment. And so I think that that's the real issue, is if we're going to have a pension plan operated on behalf of all of the beneficiaries of it, shouldn't we be able to have some say in how that's managed? And if not, then maybe Quebec did have the right approach when they developed the CAS. Maybe that is something that would make more sense. So that's, I think, the conversation that started in Alberta. It's split. There's no question. We've got, at the moment, I always say about 1/3 of the people who love the idea, 1/3 who hate it, and 1/3 who are open to being persuaded.
I don't feel like you're portraying that to me correctly.
Okay.
Let me take another run at this, because what I heard coming out was not Coyne's argument that that was part of the reforms of the 1990s that Jim Dinning was a very important part of.
Yeah.
Of taking a pension plan that had no fiduciary credibility going forward, no prudential credibility going forward, and turning it into something that is the soundest public pension plan in the Western world. I did not hear the complaint being that it's badly run. I heard the complaint being Alberta contributes disproportionately to it.
And the dollars that we contribute are badly invested in projects that in a lot of cases might be counter to our interests. I mean, when I saw over the last 10 years of the ESG investment move and part of trying to get different pension funds to de-invest from oil and gas, you can imagine how that hits Alberta, right? So we get $9 billion in revenue that we contribute to the pension fund. Our pensioners get $6 billion worth of benefits. So there's $3 billion extra each year going into the Canada pension plan. And we keep hearing, yeah, but we don't want to invest in that dirty oil and gas. Like, can't you imagine how that is going to impact Albertans? Keep on paying, but we're going to make sure that we starve your industry of any of the revenues it needs to be able to develop. That's what creates the tension. So that's what's behind why it is there's a certain portion of Albertans saying.
But isn't that only if you think of them as Albertans and not Canadians? Because no Canadian is treated differently. It's not like a person who lives in Red Deer is treated differently than a person that lives in Peterborough. People who make more money get a worse deal out of the Canada Pension Plan than people that make an average income, and more Albertans make more money. So that's a reality. But
that's not what the act says.
Not the fact that the pension plan is skewed against Alberta in any possible way.
Well, that's not what the act says, though. What the act says is that what you're supposed to do to calculate first of all, the Constitution allows us to run our own pension, and the Act allows for us to leave the pension if we choose. And there's a formula in there for how to leave it. Our calculation was that's what you do. You say, what did you put in? What did your pensioners receive in benefit? What's the surplus? How was that invested over time? That's your allocation if you want to leave. The feds dispute that, but they haven't given us an alternative number. But that's the way the law was written. And so that's what we've been looking at. And you have to understand, if it was being run on purely profit maximization values, without looking like it's moving in a direction of targeting or depriving our industry of money, it might not have been a conversation. It might be a conversation in Ontario if they had a policy saying that they weren't going to invest in cars anymore. Like that's the kind of thing I would say creates the questions among a population, is if this is my dollars that are being used to make this healthy, why isn't there a fairer way of doing the investment? So I think that's why the conversation began. But as I say, it's by no means unanimous that Albertans want to move in that direction, but it is the reason why the conversation began.
Okay, but if I take that thinking and I apply it moving forward, it would lead me to believe that you think that the poor treatment that Alberta has received in terms of its oil and gas industry and the constraints on the growth of that are in and of themselves a legitimate argument for separation.
Well, you're sort of talking about two things, because I'm just talking about an Alberta pension plan.
I know, but I'm sort of, if it doesn't work for us, we'll leave it, right? If the Canada pension plan is a poor financial deal for us, we will leave it. Takes me, if I extend that thinking, Confederation is a poor financial deal for us, we should leave it.
I think, okay, let's see if I can unbundle that a little bit, because I believe in a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. I've always said that was the name of a bill that I put forward. But think about it this way.
You stole that from René Lévesque, Premier.
Well, did he say that? Did he always talk about
Sovereignty Association?
Did he talk about a sovereign Quebec within a united Canada? I think he missed the last three words. Within a united Canada is important to me, because I think our Constitution is actually stood the test of time. If only the federal government would honor it. I think it would not only solve some of the issues we see in Quebec, but also solve some of the issues you see in Saskatchewan and Alberta. Saskatchewan actually has a higher sentiment about independence than Alberta does. But think of it this way. When I went to the US to CERAWeek in Houston, I watched Interior Secretary Doug Burgum speak, and he said something so interesting. He said, when we talk about governments, we always talk about one side of the balance sheet. We only ever talk about the liabilities, the debt. Why don't we ever talk about the assets? So I came home and I asked my administrators in energy to figure out, what is the balance sheet? What is the value of our oil and gas on the books? And it's $9 trillion. So when I have an asset worth $9 trillion and I have politicians in Ottawa saying, keep it in the ground, you can imagine that's going to cause a lot of tension. But you know what? The way you solve that is you would say, let's have everybody able to develop their own resources. Let's reduce emissions, and let's find new markets. That's the way you get to a solution. But if you're expecting Albertans to just sit down and shut up, well, people like Stephen Guilbeault says there's no economic case to continue to develop a $9 trillion asset base, you're going to get pushback. You're not going to get Albertans to agree to that. And so I think there's a change of tone. I don't think that this federal government would have won re-election, albeit with a minority, if there hadn't been a change of tone. But words are only one thing. I need to see action, as do Albertans. And I think if there is some action on addressing the 9 points that I put on the table, the 9 terrible policies brought through by Justin Trudeau, and we have a genuine commitment to build out those economic corridors so we can all get our products to market. I think that you'll see the sentiment for independence. I think it'll wane. We've always had it rise and fall. I mean, this isn't the first time that there have been individuals talking about that. There was as I've been reminded recently, because I've got a by-election going on in Old Didsbury Three Hills, there was a separatist elected there in 1979 named Gordon Kessler. And so that's, I want to avoid that. I want the country working so that
early
people
80s
don't look at that
guess.
As an option. Say it again.
Not 79, I think. Early 80s would be my guess, because I ran in Rosetown, Saskatchewan, provincially, and I lost to the Western Canada concept.
Oh, there you go. So you remember.
Oh yeah. No, it's been around for a while.
Yeah.
It's been around for a while. Can I, as a citizen of Canada, count on you to lead the no forces in that referendum if there is one in Alberta?
I'm doing that right now. I'm leading the yes to Canada, but Canada's got to be on Team Alberta too. I mean, I think that it can't be a one-way relationship. It's got to be a two-way relationship. I'm quite happy to buy cars from Ontario. I'm quite happy to buy steel and aluminum from Ontario and Quebec. I'm quite happy to work with Saskatchewan to get uranium built or developed so that we can develop nuclear. I'm talking with BC and with Manitoba about how we can get more hydro into our province. So that's what mutual support looks like. But it can't be everything but the things Alberta produces. And sadly, that has been the attitude of the government for the last 10 years. They seem to be supportive of everything but. And that's why we have the tension in the country right now.
Okay, so let's move forward to this meeting that's coming up,
Yeah.
which I'm very excited about. And I think the linkage between this is that I don't know if you'll reject this idea or not, but to go back to another Quebec comparison, the referendum situation, the separatist threat in Alberta seems to me like the old Quebec knife to the throat approach to federalism, which is like you've written a letter to Carney and you've said, here are the things we need you to do. The referendum kind of gives you an or else. If there's no referendum, you don't really have an or else to your demands. And Quebec always had, and they called it the knife to the throat strategy. They always had an or else. So is this your or else?
I have said that, and this goes back to our earlier conversation about my belief in the people and direct democracy. Alberta, the province, my government, will not put forward a referendum question on independence. However, if 177,000 Albertans sign a petition saying they want one, I'll respect that it has to be put to the people. So at the moment, we have to pass the legislation. There has to be a question on the table. There has to be a petition campaign, and there has to be a successful validation of those signatures. That hasn't happened yet. And I'm really hopeful that the Prime Minister is taking that movement as seriously as I am, because I think if we can get a few areas of common interest, address a few of these thorny problems, I think that might end up causing the air to come out of that movement. And so, if not, I can't judge what will happen with Albertans. Albertans are really angry, more angry than I've ever seen them. When we did some internal polling on this, we found that the independence sentiment was as high as 37%. When it's 37%, that's not a fringe movement. That is regular people saying enough is enough. That's not regular people saying, I just don't trust enough that we're going to see a change of direction with most of the same people who got reelected this time. So I'm going to suspend disbelief for at least a few more days, if not a few more weeks. And I'm going to work with the Prime Minister to see if I can persuade him that these 9 terrible policies that were passed, repealing those would go a long way towards creating the environment where we can get investment back. And I think go a long way towards having Albertans believe that he really is a leader who wants to change course. We haven't seen it yet. We've heard some good things, but haven't seen it yet.
So let's imagine that positive future. Let's say he comes to the meeting and he does the right things and he takes away these disincentives to investment. What's going to happen?
There'll be a few things that would happen, I think. I think what we'd begin immediately, and this is what I wrote in the letter, I hope what we can agree to is a negotiating committee that would have representatives from Ottawa, from Alberta, and from British Columbia all get together so that we can consult with First Nations and find the route. Let's find a corridor. Let's find out what Indigenous ownership would look like. Let's make sure we're addressing some of the issues around the environment. Let's work together on a pathways project. That's the one, a decarbonization project of our major oil sands producers. So that
are you as excited about that as Carney is? Because he is excited about that.
To me, it's the grand bargain. I can be a lot more excited about it if I know I'm going to get more pipelines built and more product to market, because right now it's just a cost and a multi-billion-dollar cost. But I think it's a cost the industry is willing to bear if they can also see that there's going to be more revenue, more upside, because they're going to be able to export more product. I think the thing that maybe Ontarians don't know, or the rest of Canada don't know about a barrel of oil, is our industry is very innovative. They create 6,000 products out of a barrel of oil. And one of the most important products that come out of a bitumen barrel is asphalt. So whether you're driving an electric vehicle or a regular vehicle, you still need roads to drive them on. And if you can decarbonize the production of bitumen and you're using 60% of it to lay asphalt and it's not being burned, then there isn't a CO2 problem. It would be as silly to talk about phasing out heavy oil as it would be talking about phasing out steel or phasing out cement. It's a construction material, or a lubricant, or a petrochemical material. It's an input to all kinds of products that we can make. Yeah, of course, we've got a large portion of it is used to create gasoline and diesel and aviation fuel until there's some other alternative. But what I would say is that we see in our industry that those two are linked. Let's find a way to phase out emissions, but not phase out the production of oil and gas.
So a pipeline to Prince Rupert. What else?
Maybe a pipeline to Churchill. Because that also, again, as I mentioned, allows us to go to Europe as well as to the East Coast. Maybe a spur line from James Bay as well. I know that Doug Ford has talked about that. That would also allow for another option. I think Churchill might be the better option because I think there's just more mutual benefit that comes from that one. Grays Bay is going to be very important. The Nunavut and Northwest Territories, I think they've been really under-resourced. Many of them don't even have drivable roads. They don't have year-round roads. They've got ice roads or fly in, fly out. So if you can develop out Grays Bay and then start building out the infrastructure so that all of the critical minerals can be developed there, also all of the Arctic security, icebreakers, perhaps a second NORAD base. Those are the ways that we'll also be able to demonstrate our partnership in North American energy security as well as international security, and also help to open up to incredibly resource-rich portions of the country. So I'm really excited about that, and I'll find out more on the weekend because I am going to Saskatoon to see what I might be able to partner with Quebec and Atlantic Canada. But I'm encouraged to see Tim Houston in Nova Scotia. He took off the frack ban in Nova Scotia. So it may well be that Nova Scotia and Quebec together develop their own natural gas industry to feed themselves, but also to export internationally. It may well be that is the future path, and we can come in to be able to provide additional long-term supply. But I think that provinces are beginning to look at their own self-interest and say, hey, what can we develop here? And so I'm really encouraged to have that conversation with them as well.
Twitter's full of environmentalists, and if I pulled them into this conversation right now, they'd say there's no proponent for any of those pipelines. Are they wrong? Or is somebody ready to build them?
Well, that's what happens when you destroy investor confidence by creating 9 terrible policies that basically are all geared towards keeping it in the ground. When you've got net zero power regs that you want to have zero emissions power by 2035, what are you telling the natural gas industry? You're saying don't build. What are you saying when you have a tanker ban off the West Coast? You're saying, well, why would you build a pipeline there if you're not allowed to load it onto a ship? If you've got a convoluted approval process where you have to do a whole measure of intersectionality analysis before you can approve a pipeline, who's going to bother to go through the process with the constantly shifting parameters that you've got to meet? I mean, that's why foundationally, if you're going to have an emissions cap, that the only way to achieve it is to lock in production, why would you be investing on building up more production? So that's why it's linked. It's not just one. You can choose a port and you can choose infrastructure, but if you haven't changed the environment that allows for industry to realize, yeah, there is going to be some money to be made on developing this resource, you're not going to get to square one. But what I would say is, notwithstanding the misinformation that Stephen Guilbeault put out there, Trans Mountain is 85 to 90% full. The only reason it's not 100% is we've got to dredge the second narrows so that those heavier ships can go through. And we've got British Columbia, Alberta, both asking for the federal government to do that. And I think the Prime Minister has agreed. There was a new, they call it an open season when they're talking about pipeline expansion for 100,000 additional barrels in the United States on an Enbridge line. It had 400,000 worth of bids on it. So there is a real appetite for this. One of the things I'd say is the nice part about Trans Mountain, which ultimately did get approved and did get into use, is now over half of that oil is going somewhere other than the United States. When it was first conceived of, it was conceived of to help the folks in Washington State and in California be able to get their product. Well, now it's going to China and Japan and Korea, and Spain is interested. And India is interested. Those are all potential future markets for us in Asia. But on top of that, there's still a major market for us in the United States. Is that the Americans use 19 million barrels of oil a day. They only produce 13 million barrels a day. They've got to get it from somewhere. A lot of the refineries are purposed especially for heavy oil. If they don't get it from us, they've got to get it from Iran or Venezuela. And I think we've got a pretty good value proposition. So that's why east, west, north, south, I think there's an immense opportunity for us to open up those markets. And I think we're finally on the cusp of getting a federal government who realizes that.
I've abused your time so badly. I really have to apologize, but I could not possibly let you go without asking you, especially since you raised the United States. What the fuck is Trump like? Like you're one of maybe the only person I'll ever talk to that's met him and talked to him. Give us a glimpse. I don't, just you and me. Nobody's listening. Just between you and I.
Okay.
What's Mar-a-Lago and Trump like?
Well, I would say that the thing that surprises me the most. So I got invited by Kevin O'Leary, and he was invited by a member of the club. So the nice part about Mar-a-Lago is it's 500 of his closest friends. So once you get in the gate, there isn't a huge amount of Secret Service hanging around. Right. He was there with his cabinet having meetings the day that I was there, and then the music starts blasting. And he walks in. So that's, he always likes to make a grand entrance. The funny part was that he was sitting with his iPad at the table beside us, choosing the song. So he was like our DJ for the night. So he's very hands-on. But he came over and he chatted with our table. And then there were multiple times that we had the opportunity to just interact with him and ask him. And the advice I was given was he doesn't like to be contradicted. Don't challenge him. So I was thinking, what can I do to get to a yes with him? I just wanted to know, does he want to buy more oil and gas from us? And he said yes. So that's why I'm pursuing that relationship the way we are. We want to maintain diplomatic ties. We've got a bit of a tough patch we're going through right now, but you don't throw away a 100-year relationship from the past and another 100-year relationship on the future just because of some of the problems that we're having right now. The other thing I'd say about him is that I think he is open to being convinced by a good argument. Because one of the things that Kevin O'Leary was trying to persuade him of that I got to watch was that he shouldn't shut down TikTok. He should try to get TikTok purchased by an American group so that it stayed outside the control and the data wouldn't be transferred to China. And over the course of a couple of times talking with him that day and then also at the club, I think he was persuaded because the week later he talked about how he wasn't going to shut down TikTok and he was looking to have Larry Ellison take it over. So I've watched that he can be persuaded. I suppose the advice that I give to others trying to interact with him is you don't go down to Trump as Justin Trudeau did and say, yeah, we're not going to meet our NATO commitment until 2030. And if you put tariffs on it, it would collapse our economy, because that's how the conversation went. And so Trump said, okay, well, if it would collapse your economy if you had tariffs and you can't defend yourself, well, then you're not a real country. You're no better than a 51st state. And everyone laughed at that, but it kind of got in his head that what is Canada if it's not going to do these things? That's why I think Trudeau really bungled that first visit. If we're going to persuade Trump, you have to say, we want to do business with you. We think it's in your interest to do so. You benefit from getting our products at a discount that you can use to upgrade your product, your value-added products, and then we buy them back at a greater amount than anyone else in the world. Canada, even though we're 10% of the size of the US, we buy more goods and services than any other nation. And so if you can frame our interest in terms of American interest, we'll have a much better chance of getting to an agreement than going in like a victim, saying, oh my goodness, you've got to do this for us because otherwise we'll be hurt. Yeesh, talk about a terrible strategy. So I think that the change of tone that we've seen with the new prime minister, he said, yeah, we want to do business, but you know what, if we don't, we'll do business with each other and we'll do business and we'll find new markets. That's the right approach. We've got to do all of the above. And if we can do all of the above, I think we'll just be stronger as a country. So I'm really encouraged. I should say that. It may not sound like it, but I'm really encouraged by some of the change of tone that we've seen. But it does need to be followed up with action. And I guess we'll find out this weekend about what that action might look like.
Godspeed to you in Saskatoon.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
It's a lovely town, by the way.
Yeah, go Riders, hey, and go Oilers.
Right now, it's go Oilers. We're all Oilers fans right now.
I love it. I hope that's the case. But as I'll cheer on any Canadian team over any of the Americans any day. So looking forward to making Canada proud here.
Me too. Thank you so much, Premier. You've been very, very generous with your time and your thoughts, and I'm so grateful to you. As are, I'm sure, all my listeners or watchers. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, our sponsors, CN Rail, and ironically, TikTok Canada, and all of you Herle Burly-ites who watched or listened. Thank you very much. Premier Smith, good luck at the meetings this weekend.
Thank you.